making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more than law will allow. I'm a good old boy, you know my mama loved me, but she don't understand. They keep showing my hands and not my face on TV. Just some good old boys that wouldn't change if they could, fighting the system like a modern day Robin Hood, straighten the curves, flat on the hills. One day the mountain might get them, but the law never will. Making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more the law will allow. Making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more the law will allow.
Alright, welcome to the Les Paul section of this video. The Les Paul has been one of the most counterfeited guitars, if not the most counterfeited electric guitar in history. The values of these instruments have become astronomical, and this is just something that comes with the territory. The 57 Les Paul and any of the bursts, because the values are so extremely high, it's just a huge target for counterfeits. There's just so many ways to go about making a counterfeit Les Paul. I mean, of course, you can steal the PAFs out of an SG or whatever, and you know, these parts came on a lot of different guitars, like the tuners and the knobs and the pots. I mean, you know, you can throw them on any guitar and make believe that it's a 59, but that doesn't make the guitar a 59 just because you threw a bunch of 59 parts on there, or sent it to your guy that does, you know, super duper relic finish jobs with, you know, checking and wear and relicking and this and that. Yeah, so moving on, of course the Les Paul was discontinued in 60, and when it resurfaced in 68 as the reissue Les Paul Custom, they also offered a reissue Les Paul Standard, and a lot of these reissues, well, with the Les Paul Custom, they were very limited with a one-piece neck and a one-piece body, and they quickly went to the pancake body and the three-piece neck, and of course the volute on the back of the headstock, and I've seen them sanded off. I've seen 1970 Les Paul Customs with the volute sanded off, which is this guy right here on the back of the neck, and that's real sad. They're trying to, you know, whatever the case may be, trying to represent it as an earlier model. And Made in USA is something that we see on Gibson guitars starting in late 69, early 1970. Of course, the transition to the one-piece to the three-piece neck. I mean, the thing is, with the Les Paul guitars, they had the reissue went on, you know, for the gold top into, you know, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72. And a lot of those guitars it was a P90 gold top guitar, and a lot of them were just a stop tailpiece wrap around without the tune-o-matic. So it was just this piece down here, and then a lot of them were the stop tailpiece with the tune-o-matic and two P90 pickups. And, you know, because those guitars were one piece, a lot of times maybe we see people throwing humbuckers in them, routing them out, throwing humbuckers in them. Bam, you know, it's like whatever. It's like kind of like a 57 gold top. I mean, so it's something to look out for. And another thing to look out for, a lot of times we see with Les Paul deluxe models in the early 60s, we've got the gold tops with a three-piece neck. People swap out the mini humbuckers for P90s, and they'll market it as a reissue, which is a much more valuable gold top with P90s. But we know that it's not a real reissue because, of course, the deluxe had the volute here on the back of the neck and also a three-piece neck, and the reissue did not have the volute. So it's kind of a dead giveaway when we see that. It's real obvious, and it's to the educated buyer, it's like, man, what are you trying to do, you know? So moving on with Les Pauls, I mean, when I look at them, of course, the first thing I'll look for is maybe a break here at the back of the headstock, change tuners, and they just, different models had different eras, you know, with different tuners, and so you just have to familiarize yourself with the different models and different tuners and cross-reference it to know what was supposed to come on it. You know, maybe Google some images, look for the screw holes. That's something I always look for. A guitar that's marked second, I'll look for a 2 on the back of the headstock. And this is something I personally steer clear from. I don't, you know, that's just a hurdle I don't want to jump later on when I go to sell the guitar. And when we look at the heel, you know, I hear about a lot of heel repairs. And I think maybe this is something that's actually more common on SG guitars than Les Pauls. But something I'll look at is the neck set and the heel here to make sure that it's all good. And I'm a nitpicker. I'm going to look for the strap buttons, any additional holes, and in the cavities to see if there's any additional holes. Of course, I want to see the original pots with original solder joints and matching date codes. And also, I understand that these vintage Les Pauls, they had an era of what they call the bumblebee capacitors here in the pocket. And I think that was somewhere in between 55, 50, 55, 56, somewhere in there. And then it went all the way into the early 60s. And, you know, maybe 62, somewhere in there, 63. And then they went to what I call the Black Beauty Sprague capacitors, which, you know, I believe Sprague is the same name brand as the Bumblebee. They just kind of, the cosmetics are a little different. It's got orange on there instead of the cool stripes. And then the name brand of the capacitors that predate the Bumblebees in the early 50s, I'm not even sure what and all they use, but of course it looks totally different. Let's see, moving on. Okay, on these Les Paul models, what we have with vintage Les Pauls, the vintage Les Paul market it's really a very tough market. And the reason why I say that is because some of the best pickups that Gibson ever made were, of course, the PAFs and then the patent sticker pickups. And really, the patent sticker pickups they were only offered, you know, up until 74. And so these pickups, you know, on these guitars, I mean, these guitars, they basically just did not come with those pickups. When the Les Paul Standard was reintroduced, it was around that time, 1974, 1975, and so some of the very, very early Les Pauls would have had patent sticker pickups, which are great pickups, but most of them don't. Most of them have T-tops. And so the reason why it's so hard to find a vintage Les Paul that has patent sticker pickups is because they only offered the Les Paul Custom reissue in 1968. Of course, 69, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, and then 73. So they offered it for 6 years, but you have to also consider that the Les Paul Custom came in a fretless Wonder. So the guitar in original condition, although the pickups sound great, is really fairly difficult to bend strings and not really much of a playable instrument for a lot of modern day guitar players. And so, like, this guitar has had a refret, And that's something that I'll, when I'm shopping for a vintage Les Paul, well, a lot of guitars I won't accept a refret. Just across the board, I just like to have original frets as part of my investment. But I'll make an exception for the Les Paul Custom because it originally, and really any Gibson guitar that originally did come with fretless wonders. Of course, I'd rather, if the guitar originally came with fretless wonders, I personally would rather have a refretted guitar that's been refretted excellently and be able to play the guitar, because I think that actually is something that will help me to sell the guitar to the next buyer, because nobody wants to be the guy to buy the Les Paul and have it refretted. But if it's already been done, then that's just a weight off anyone's shoulder, because of course there's almost nobody wants the fretless wonder frets. So other than that, these finishes, that's another thing. I really don't understand when Gibson went from nitrocellulose to polyurethane, but I have observed as late as 1972 some thinner finish that could possibly be nitrocellulose. And then in 73, it seems like across the board, I noticed that the finishes are thicker. And of course, in 74 and throughout the late 70s, the thicker polyurethane finishes. And this is something that it's going to make the guitar sound totally different because it has a thinner finish. So, and it's another thing. I mean, when to know what kind of finish the guitar came with is important in identifying an original finish on a Gibson guitar. And then also, too, not so much with Les Pauls, but so many other Gibson guitars, the fade is something that we're accustomed to now. And, of course, on burst, the fade. And just through the years, the different hues of the burst, what color it's supposed to be, and then some obviously fade a lot more than others. And so this is all something to become familiar with after looking at so many different guitars. Of course, another thing that I like about Les Paul guitars is the nuts wider on these guitars than the SG guitars. And that's something that a lot of people would complain about in the late 60s, the 1 9/16 versus the 9 11/16 nut width being a little slimmer. And in the early 70s customs, that's just not the case. They do have the wider nut width, and so that is something that's great. These guitars, of course, are super heavy. This one's just like an ounce under 10 pounds. All right, so I remembered one more thing to mention about Gibson Les Paul guitars that I've seen in the past that have been misrepresented. And it's not uncommon to see a 1960 Classic. The Les Paul Classic model used to read 1960 right on the pickguard, and a lot of times, we'd see them in burst and gold tops, and I guess they also offered them in black and a few other colors. Some of them had high flames, some of them were plain tops. Anyways, what people would do sometimes, we see they just throw a set of nickel covers on there and then change the pick guard on the gold tops, and then they'll market it and represent it as an R7 or a 57 custom shop 57 gold top reissue, like a historic. And of course, that's just not the case. A lot of times, it's definitely just another thing to look out for. And then who knows how far people have taken it in the past, maybe even try to pass it off as a real 57 gold top. Who knows? Of course, it depends who you talk to, and it's just one more thing to be cautious and look out for. And of course, a lot of the markers, on the classics were different colors, so that's a dead giveaway. But then they had a few years where the trapezoid inlays were more of a convincing color. I guess it's time to move on to the SG. Welcome to the SG section of this video. If you made it this far in this video, congratulations. It's been a much longer video than I expected it to be. But thanks for hanging in there, and I hope I have some more interesting stuff to say. As far as SG guitars go, and really any guitar, I can't stress it enough. If you're going to buy a guitar, now this guitar is not a super valuable guitar, but you should just look it over. When you look it over, go ahead and look it over about 2 more times. And when I say look it over, I mean I want you to look at the guitar from the headstock all the way down slowly, all the way down. Look at it from every angle. Look at it from the side, slowly. Look at it all the way down, from the back, top to bottom, bottom to top. Turn it over, side to side. Look at the top of the headstock. Look at the bottom of the guitar. I mean, the last thing you want to do when you buy a guitar is get home and then find something that you didn't see. I've done it so many times. And it's the biggest disappointment. Oh man, I didn't see that. And it's like, oh man, it just bums me out so bad, And so you can avoid a lot of heartache that way. Now, with SG guitars, these guitars in history have not been forged nearly as much as many other electric guitar models because they just haven't been as valuable. Now here, recently, SG guitar values are climbing up quickly, kind of like the Strat values, 15, 20 years ago. And now they're actually pretty much comparable to Stratocaster values, surprisingly. I didn't think we'd ever see this. This is really actually amazing. But in my ventures through vintage guitar finds, I can honestly say I really haven't seen that many SGs that I would consider to be forgeries or fake guitars. Nevertheless, the most valuable Gibson SG guitars are going to range from 1961 to 1965, and this would be what would be considered the guard on the side, predating the bat wings or full guard design that we later see in 1966 and later SGs. Now, this being a 72, it does have the guard on one side, and this is actually the Les Paul guard, which I think is really cool, and the Moon guard. Once again, a funky 70s thing. A lot of people think it's ugly, but hey, I don't care what other people think. I mean, to me, it's funky, it's 70s, it's cool, it's got the big headstock. For the money, an unbelievable guitar value. I mean, I would recommend these early 70s SG. I would put them right up there, against some of the best Gibson guitars ever made. I mean, they're just that good. It's unreal. And that's why we see the values of these guitars increasing dramatically, because everyone's figuring it out. Hey, these are great guitars. I mean, there's no reason why they're not valuable. I mean, so anyways, moving on. Because these are typically, not fake, of course, the early, pre-65 would be the most suspect if there were any. And then, of course, custom colors, just like anything, or any guitar. What I look for on these guitars is actually, interesting enough, I find the SG guitars to be some of the worst Gibson guitars as far as the necks go. They just are not that straight. A lot of them, I've seen quite a few different ones that were twisted, or what I call the case hump. In a vintage SG guitar, we get a high spot right here, and basically you have to consider, it's a valuable instrument, so of course there's going to be tension on the truss rod. The strings are going to be tuned up. A lot of times what happens, these guitars will lay in a case like this, and as they're laying down like that, they're resting there's a hump in the case, and they're resting kind of like almost like the stand right there, and so it creates what I call the case hump, and it's something to look out for. Of course, on an SG, the vulnerable areas, like on this guitar, the vulnerable areas are going to be right here. A lot of times, actually, there is a crack here on this guitar, but a lot of times where the input jack, we'll see a crack there because the guy stepped on the cord, and it's just something to look out for. Another vulnerable area is here in the neck pocket. We see a lot of cracks on different, guitars, and some more severe than others, and a lot of repairs, and they have, a lot of them have heel repairs. And the SG guitars, the heel is something on an SG that really changed dramatically through the years, and it's a good way to actually pinpoint and the year, because they would change from year to year. And interesting enough, we actually were looking at Jimi Hendrix playing Red House on the white SG Custom at Stockholm, I think it was, and for a long time we thought it was a 69 SG, and it turns out it was a 68, and you can tell by the heel. But so anyways, of course, this is another vulnerable area. Always look for cracks here, and it's the same with all the other guitars. It could be a second, look for that. The change tuners, really, for some reason, SGs seem to be a little more vulnerable, and I don't know if it's just because they were rock and roll guitars and they were just in the hands of people that were on the road or moving around quite a bit more than other people that played other Gibson guitars, but we do see more cracks here in the headstocks where the tuners are on SG guitars than pretty much any other Gibson electric guitar that I've ever seen. So it's definitely some place to look for additional cracks. Another place we see a lot of cracks on these guitars is going to be like right here. There's a crack, a screw stress crack in the body here. And a lot of times the pick guard on these guitars will leave cracks in this area. So it's another vulnerable crack area for an SG. And I personally think a good rule of thumb on the crack is if it doesn't go more than halfway through, hey, it's a vintage guitar, it's probably all right. If it does go more than halfway through, like the body, whether it be really anywhere, of course that is, you're getting in the danger zone where obviously it's to the point now where it could possibly come apart. So you definitely want to be leery of serious cracks, because of course they devalue the instrument. With SG guitars, man, a lot of times we see SG specials modded out to humbuckers. This is a popular mod, like the P90 models modded for humbuckers. And then sometimes we see like Melody Maker SG body style Melody Makers modded for humbuckers. Once again, a little single coil pickup modded for humbuckers. It's very common to see Grover tuners added, and this is something we see on a lot of vintage SGs all the time. And a lot of times it does take an additional routing in the headstock to accommodate the Grover tuners. And so if you go to put the original Clousons back on the guitar, you're looking at possibly doweling it out, or in maybe even using what I would call like a hider ring, like some sort of washer or something down here that's wider that would hide the additional routing for the Grovers. And of course, Grovers typically have a different screw pattern once again than the Clousons, and so you're going to see the Clouson drill holes. This one appears to have original Gibson label Schaller tulip tuners, which is pretty cool, and they changed the tuners a lot on SGs through the years on different models, and so you just have to cross-reference them for originality. Of course, SG Customs, a lot of those were fretless Wonder guitars, and that's something to look out for a lot of players. Same with the fretless Wonder Les Pauls. They're not going to want the fretless Wonders, and they're not going to want to be the guy to replace them. So that's something to look at. As far as anything else, of course, a lot of people are not a fan of the Bigsby on an SG. Me personally, I think it's really cool because, these guitars are not too heavy typically anyways, and they have a tendency to be the headstock wants to go down, so this just helps to balance the guitar, in my opinion. And on this particular model, because it doesn't have a neck pitch, you can actually easily do a tremolo without having to worry about stressing your bridge pins, which typically, with the neck pitch and a Lear vibrola, you do stress the bridge pins. So I don't recommend doing a whole lot of whammy on most SGs. And so that's also part of the reason why, Strats are more popular for their tremolo systems. Okay, is there anything else to really talk about here? Nope, I guess we're going to be moving on to the F-hole guitars.